The tragedy of John Travolta is that those who love him only want him in his most perfect version. On screen, he is the 24-year-old guy in the white suit, arm raised high on the Brooklyn dance floor, invincible under the disco lights. That is the image all of America has kept in its memory. But what the dance floor never tells is the real story of the man behind the lights. He lost his first love when he was only 23 years old, feeling her final breath leave her body right in his arms. He knelt on the bathroom floor in the Bahamas, performing CPR on his 16-year-old son who lay motionless, begging that body to respond and receiving only silence. He sat by the hospital bed, watching the woman who had been by his side for nearly 30 years lose her battle with breast cancer. The same disease, breast cancer, had already taken the two women he loved most. The dance floor never told the whole story. The world only wants to see him dance, only wants to remember him at 24, only wants to keep him forever in the lights. But today, behind the aged face of one of Hollywood's greatest actors, is the question of how a man who made all of America dance along with him could have a life that kept pulling him into the darkness. Before we look past the stage lights to find the real person behind the legend, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like for John Travolta. John Joseph Travolta was born on February 18, 1954, in Englewood, a small town in New Jersey. He grew up as the youngest of 6 siblings in an Italian-Irish family. His father, Salvatore Travolta, had been a semi-professional football player before turning to the tire business to support the family. His mother, Helen Cecilia Burke, was the one who saw something extraordinary in her youngest son long before the world knew his name. Helen did not simply raise John. She passed on to him something deep, the belief that the human body can tell stories, that a tilt of the head, a step of the foot, a gesture of the hand can touch others more powerfully than 1,000 words. Before becoming a drama and English teacher at the local high school, Helen had stood on stage as an actress and singer, and she carried that spirit into every dinner, every weekend evening in the Travolta living room. In that house, acting and singing were not careers. They were the family language, the way they spoke to one another. Sister Ellen and Sister Anne both pursued acting. Brother Joey appeared on television, and Sister Margaret also touched the stage to varying degrees. But John absorbed it most deeply, almost by instinct. Performing arts for him was not a conscious choice. It was something that had soaked into him from the roots, from those evenings when his mother sang and his father clapped. In 1971, at age 17, John Travolta dropped out of Dwight Morrow High School. He left Englewood for New York alone, with no money, no connections, nothing but the faith his mother had planted. New York City in the early 1970s was noisy, dangerous, completely different from the quiet street where he had grown up. The Travolta family was not rich, but not destitute either. What the 17-year-old lacked was not money, but the certainty that he was on the right path, that his dream was not an illusion. The first years in New York gave him a place to build his body language. He took supporting roles in the Broadway musical Rain, joined the touring production of Grease and The Show Over Here, with the Andrews Sisters. On television, his first appearance was as a construction worker with a concussion in the series Emergency in 1972. Nothing stood out yet, but he was learning how to make his body communicate with the audience, finding his own rhythm in every step, every turn of the head, every moment of silence between lines. The first real turning point came in 1975 when he landed the role of Vinnie Barbarino in the ABC sitcom Welcome Back, Kotter. The part of a tough Brooklyn high school student, funny and light. Travolta brought something that Gabe Kaplan's script had never written, a physical magnetism, a natural charisma that made viewers unable to look away whenever he appeared on screen, even for just a few seconds. He did not simply play the role. He took over the frame, bending the entire room's attention toward himself. That same year, he also stepped into the world of music, and by July 1976, his single Let Her In climbed to number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, proving that his appeal was not limited to the small screen. For the first time, Hollywood realized this young man was not just an actor. He was a phenomenon. But real life was quietly preparing him for his first lesson, a lesson no stage could teach. On the set of The Boy in the Plastic Bubble in 1976, John Travolta met Diana Hyland. She was 41, he was 22. In the film, she played his mother, an 18-year age gap. A mother-son relationship on screen. The outside world would never fully understand what happened between them. On set, the two talked non-stop about everything, from morning until the crew turned off the lights. Travolta later said that from the moment he met Diana, he was drawn to her, that they were like two crazy people talking continuously all day on the set. After a month, their feelings became romantic. And the strangest thing Travolta remembered about that period was that both of them carried the same fear before they met. He had thought he would never have a successful relationship. Diana told him she had thought exactly the same. And then, in his words, bam, everything changed. He said he had never been happier in his life, never felt more comfortable with anyone. They chose a house and planned to move in together right after he finished shooting his next film. The future seemed certain. For the first time in 22 years, John Travolta felt everything was in its right place. Then that certainty shattered. Diana had been diagnosed with breast cancer in 1975 before they met and had undergone a mastectomy. In the early months of the relationship, the disease seemed under control, but cancer keeps no promises to anyone. Diana's condition deteriorated rapidly, faster than any doctor's prediction, faster than any prayer could stop. Travolta, 23 years old, standing on the threshold of the most brilliant career of the decade, had to face a reality no script had prepared him for. The woman he loved was dying, and all he could do was stay by her side as time shortened day by day. On March 27, 1977, in Los Angeles, Diana Hyland died at the age of 41. Travolta was there. He said he felt her final breath leave her body right in his arms. He was 23, and this was the first time in his life he had witnessed death. Not on a screen, not in a script, but in a quiet room where the person he loved most lay motionless. A few months later, while the pain was still raw, he told a reporter words in the voice of a young man trying to understand something a young man should not have to understand. I never loved anyone more in my life. I had already chosen a house, and Diana and I planned to move in right after this film. If Diana were still alive, I very likely would have married her. And then he added a sentence that nearly 5 decades later still haunts. I always feel Diana is with me. I mean her intentions. Diana always wanted the whole world for me. This was the original wound, the first crack that shaped everything after it. The same disease, breast cancer, would return 43 years later to take the second woman he loved most. But in 1977, Travolta did not know that. He only knew the house he had chosen was now empty, and that he still had a film to finish. In December 1977, only 9 months after Diana Hyland's death, Saturday Night Fever opened across America. The whole world saw Tony Manero, young, strong, full of life, invincible on the Brooklyn disco floor. The white suit, the right arm raised high through the lights, the Bee Gees' rhythm playing, that moment became a pop culture icon of the entire 1970s. The film grossed more than $237 million worldwide. Travolta received an Oscar nomination for Best Actor at age 24, becoming one of the youngest actors ever so honored. But no one sitting in the dark theater that night knew that the man who created Tony Manero, the invincible figure under the disco lights, had buried his love only 9 months earlier. This was the core paradox appearing for the first time in John Travolta's life. The screen gave him immortality, real life gave him loss, and the dance floor became the refuge, the only place where his body was free, the only place where pain could not keep up with the rhythm of his feet, the only place where turning loss into movement gave the wound a place to rest even if it never truly healed. 1 year later, in June 1978, Grease opened and turned Travolta from an American star into an irresistible global phenomenon. Danny Zuko, perfectly slicked back black hair, leather jacket, tilted smile, forever young, forever singing under the lights of Rydell High. The film grossed more than $396 million worldwide, and the soundtrack with hits like You're the One That I Want and Summer Nights dominated every music chart for the entire year. And the world did what the world always does with icons. It froze John Travolta at age 24, locked him forever in the images of Tony Manero and Danny Zuko. And from then on, every sign of his aging would be regarded as a betrayal of the immortal image they themselves had created. Travolta was not just an actor. He sang, he danced, he was a rare, complete entertainer of his generation. At age 25, John Travolta had already reached a peak that most actors never touch in a lifetime. 2 legendary films, 1 Oscar nomination, hundreds of millions of dollars in box office, an entire generation dancing along with him. But the harsh reality of the entertainment industry is that the higher a star's peak, the more ruthless the collapse that follows. And John Travolta's downward slide after Saturday Night Fever in Greece was not an overnight fall but a slow disintegration that stretched across nearly an entire decade. Urban Cowboy in 1980 brought moderate success, enough to keep his name on the posters, but it was the last light before the darkness closed in. Staying Alive in 1983, the sequel to Saturday Night Fever itself, directed by Sylvester Stallone, was departed by critics. Perfect in 1985 with Jamie Lee Curtis failed disastrously. Two of a Kind in 1983, the attempt to reunite with Olivia Newton-John in hopes of recreating the Grease magic, sank without a ripple. Each film tried to find a new John Travolta, but audiences only wanted to keep the 24-year-old guy in the white suit, and Hollywood does not forgive aging. Travolta at 30 was no longer Tony Manero, and the industry had no idea what to do with him if he was not Tony Manero. Through the second half of the 1980s and into the early 1990s, he virtually disappeared from mainstream Hollywood's radar. Big roles stopped coming. Good scripts were rejected before he even got to read them. He did small films, television movies, straight-to-video pictures. Look Who's Talking in 1989 and its two sequels brought in money but not respect. Many critics had already written the career obituary for him, missing only the date on the tombstone. Yet in the middle of that darkest period, two things kept John Travolta from sinking completely. The first was Kelly Preston. In 1989, on the set of The Experts, a comedy so unsuccessful that almost no one remembers it ever existed, Travolta met actress Kelly Kamalelehua Smith, known professionally as Kelly Preston. They married in 1991, holding two ceremonies, one in Paris in September and another in Daytona Beach, Florida. Kelly did not come to John when he was shining. She came when he was at the bottom, when all of Hollywood had turned its back, when his name was linked more to failure than to glory. That said a great deal about the kind of person she was, and about the relationship that would last nearly 30 years, through the brightest peaks and the darkest abysses life could create. The second was the Church of Scientology. From 1975, while shooting The Devil's Rain, Travolta had become a member of the organization. In the dark decade when Hollywood turned away, Scientology was still there, a support system that never left. This relationship would spark fierce controversy for the rest of his life, but in this specific period, from Travolta's own perspective, it was one of the few things that kept him standing when everything else was collapsing. Then the call that changed everything came in the early 1990s. A young director named Quentin Tarantino decided to make the biggest gamble of his career on a choice the entire industry considered insane. He wanted John Travolta for the role of Vincent Vega, a cold philosophical hitman, the complete opposite of Tony Manero from every angle imaginable. Hollywood's reaction was nearly unanimous. Why choose an actor whose time had passed? In October 1994, Pulp Fiction opened, and the answer rang out so clearly that no one could ignore it. Travolta on screen was cold, dangerous, seductive in an entirely new way. This was not the flashy disco kid. This was a grown man walking with the confidence of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. And then came the twist dance with Uma Thurman at Jack Rabbit Slim's. Once again, John Travolta found freedom on the dance floor. But this time it was not the blinding disco lights and the feverish Bee Gees beat. It was a simple, slow dance between two strangers in an ordinary diner. And somehow it was more beautiful than anything Tony Manero had ever done. The film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes. Travolta received his second Oscar nomination, 17 years after the first, a gap long enough to be a story in itself. BAFTA nomination, SAG nomination, Golden Globe nomination, Best Actor from the Los Angeles Film Critics Association. Hollywood, the very industry that had written his career obituary, now had to admit a truth it had tried to ignore for an entire decade. John Travolta had never lost his talent. They had simply stopped looking. The years after Pulp Fiction became a second peak every bit as brilliant as the first. Get Shorty in 1995 brought a Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Comedy. Broken Arrow in 1996 and Face Off in 1997, both directed by John Woo, proved he could dominate the action genre. Primary Colors in 1998, directed by Mike Nichols, earned another Golden Globe nomination. A Civil Action the same year showed he could stand solidly in serious drama opposite Robert Duvall. Alongside the career revival, personal life was also at its most beautiful stage. First son Jet was born in April 1992, and Travolta later said he held the baby for hours through that first night while Kelly slept. Daughter Ella Blue arrived in April 2000 at their home in Los Angeles, in a birth Kelly described as unbelievably beautiful. A stable marriage, a growing family, a second career explosion. From the outside, John Travolta seemed to have won. He had proved that rebirth is real, that Hollywood can abandon you, but talent never leaves the person who possesses it. In April 1992, Jet Travolta was born, the first child of John and Kelly. Travolta later recounted that when Jet arrived, he held his son for hours while Kelly slept. A young father sitting in the quiet of the night, the newborn on his chest, listening to a rhythm of breathing he had never heard before in his life. That moment, simple, no stage, no audience, no soundtrack, was one of the memories he treasured most, worth more than any award ever given to him. But Jet's life did not follow the path any father would wish. When he was still very young, Jet was diagnosed with Kawasaki syndrome, a disease that causes inflammation of the blood vessel walls, usually appearing in children and capable of leaving long-term damage. As he grew, the boy faced seizures that occurred with frightening frequency, every 5 to 10 days, each lasting 45 seconds to a minute, after which Jet would often sleep for 12 hours straight. For many years, the Travolta family publicly stated only that Jet had Kawasaki syndrome. It was not until the 2009 trial, before a jury and the cameras of the world, that Travolta first openly acknowledged that his son was autistic. The delayed acknowledgement was connected to the Church of Scientology's views on neurological and psychiatric conditions, a complexity no simple perspective can fairly judge. Because here there are no villains, only a family trying to protect their child by every means they believed were right. But beyond the medical diagnoses and the debates the media would never stop exploiting, Jet was first of all a teenager loved fiercely by his parents. The Travolta family lived at Jumbelair Aviation Estates in Ocala, Florida, a residential community with its own runway where Travolta could take off from his own backyard. And they tried to keep life as normal as possible. Neighbor Rich Kopsel told the local Ocala Star Banner that we treated them like normal neighbors and that you could see the love in the parents' eyes for that boy. At the end of December 2008, the Travolta family went to Grand Bahama Island for the winter, as they had done many times before. An ordinary vacation, sea, sun, family together in the familiar holiday house. Nothing foreshadowed that the morning of January 2, 2009 would become the day that split John Travolta's life into before and after. Around 10:15 a.m., a nanny ran to wake John and Kelly. Jet had been found unconscious in the bathroom. Travolta raced downstairs with his wife. This is the detail he recounted at the trial that September, word by word. Before the jury, the voice of a father trying to stay calm while describing the worst moment of his life. When they arrived, a caregiver was performing chest compressions on Jet. Travolta immediately began CPR. The man who had once made entire theaters rise and applaud, who had once made a whole generation dance with him on the disco floor, was now on his knees on a cold bathroom floor in the Bahamas, mouth to mouth with his 16-year-old son, blowing breath after breath, begging that body to respond, begging in the only language a father has when every other language has become meaningless. Jet did not respond. The boy he had once held all night when he was newborn, the boy whose warm body and tiny breath had rested on his chest 16 years earlier, now lay motionless under his hands, and no miracle happened. The death certificate later listed the cause as seizure. In the panic of that morning, Travolta signed an initial document declining to take Jet to the local hospital, a decision made in desperation that he could never have imagined would be exploited only weeks later. Jet's body was cremated in the Bahamas, and the family brought the ashes back to the house in Ocala, Florida, the house with the runway where he had once taken his son up into the sky. In 2014, 5 years after Jet's death, Travolta sat before an audience at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane in London and spoke about his son. His voice still trembled. He said, "This is the worst thing that has ever happened in my life. I don't know if I will get through it." 5 years had passed, and he still said, "I don't know. Not I have gotten through it. Not time heals everything, but I don't know." Yet the tragedy of losing a child was not the final blow that January morning delivered to his family. Only 3 weeks after Jet's death, on January 23, 2009, 3 people were arrested in the Bahamas for conspiring to extort $25 million from the Travolta family. Ambulance worker Torino Lightbourne and former Bahamian Senator Pleasant Bridgewater threatened to sell the media information implying Travolta was at fault in his son's death, using the very document, declining the ambulance that he had signed in his panic. In September 2009, Travolta had to fly to Nassau, take the witness stand, and recount that morning once more, every detail, every minute, every breath, before the jury, before opposing counsel, before the television cameras of the entire world. He had to relive his son's death on the courtroom stage, where no director called cut, no second take existed, no role protected him. The first trial was declared a mistrial because of procedural error when a local politician suggested the jury had already acquitted the defendants. When the second trial was about to begin, Travolta decided to withdraw the charges. Prosecutor Neil Braithwaite read in court, "The Travolta family says this matter has caused them unbearable pain and pressure, and they want to put everything behind them." He wanted to stop, even if it meant the extortionists went free, even if it meant justice was not served, because the price of justice was having to tell the story of his son's death one more time, and he no longer had the strength to pay that price. In the months and years after Jet's death, Travolta said the Church of Scientology had supported his continuously, from Monday to Sunday, without a single day off for 2 full years. "I don't know if I would have gotten through it without their support," he said. "Our church is the #1 thing that kept us standing." And then, in the middle of a darkness that seemed endless, in a house that still echoed with Jet's absence, a small light appeared. On November 23, 2010, nearly 2 years after Jet's death, Kelly Preston gave birth to their 3rd son at a hospital in Florida. The baby weighed 3.7 kilograms and was named Benjamin. Travolta called the child a miracle and told reporters, "The little boy has brought a new spirit and a new purpose to the house." Kelly Preston entered John Travolta's life on the set of The Experts in 1989. When Kelly met John, he was at the bottom of his career, his name tied to films no one watched, and most of Hollywood had written his career obituary without even bothering to notify him. She did not come for the fame, not for Tony Manero, not for the white suit. She came for the real person behind all of that, and she chose to stay. They married in 1991 with 2 ceremonies, one in Paris and one in Daytona Beach, Florida, and from that day, Kelly Preston became something larger than a wife in Travolta's life. She was his partner, the co-creator of his reality, the quiet center amid every storm life would keep throwing at their family. In a Hollywood world where marriages shatter faster than award seasons change, they held on to each other for nearly 30 years. Not because life was easy, but precisely because it was not easy at all. Kelly was beside John on the bathroom floor in the Bahamas on the morning of January 2, 2009. She ran down the stairs with him. She watched him kneel and perform CPR on Jet. She witnessed their firstborn not wake up. Then she was beside him at the extortion trial in Nassau that September, sitting in the courtroom, watching her husband stand on the witness stand and recount the worst morning of their lives before the cameras of the entire world. Every detail, every minute, every breath. Statistics show that most couples who lose a child break apart within a few years after the tragedy. The pain grows too large and becomes a wall between 2 people, each hurting in their own way and neither able to reach the other. John and Kelly did not break. They chose the opposite path. Nearly 2 years after Jet's death, in November 2010, Kelly gave birth to Benjamin, their 3rd child, the child Travolta called a miracle. Benjamin was living proof that they chose to continue, chose to love again, chose to open their hearts to a new life, even though they knew better than anyone that love always carries the risk of loss. Then in 2012, when 2 male massage therapists sued Travolta over inappropriate behavior, and the media exploded with rumors about his private life. When former pilot Doug Gotterba alleged a romantic relationship in the 1980s and all of Hollywood whispered, Kelly was still there. All the lawsuits were later withdrawn. None ever reached a formal trial. Attorney Marty Singer dismissed every accusation as fabricated. But what mattered was not the legal outcome. What mattered was that Kelly did not publicly defend her husband with long television statements, did not hold press conferences, did not write rebuttals. She simply did not leave. In Hollywood, loyal silence sometimes says more than any speech, and then the disease arrived. Kelly Preston was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she chose to fight in silence the way she had lived her entire life beside John, discreetly, resiliently, protecting the family to her last breath. 2 years of chemotherapy and radiation, 2 years traveling between MD Anderson Cancer Center and the house in Florida, and almost no one outside the family knew. That spoke to the character of both spouses. They protected each other to the end, even when death was knocking at the door, even when sharing might have brought the sympathy of millions. On July 12, 2020, Kelly Preston died at the age of 57. Travolta announced the news on Instagram, and the words he wrote carried the weight of a man trying to stay calm while the world inside him was collapsing. It is with a heavy heart that I share that my wife, the beautiful Kelly, lost her 2-year battle with breast cancer. I will be taking some time to be there for our children who have lost their mother. Please forgive us if we do not hear from us for a while. And this was the moment the most ruthless loop in John Travolta's life closed into a circle so perfect it was terrifying. In 1977, Diana Hyland died of breast cancer in Travolta's arms. He was 23. In 2020, Kelly Preston died of breast cancer. He was 66. The same disease, 43 years apart, took the 2 women he loved most in his life. The first time he was a young man who had not yet understood what death was. The second time he was a man who understood all too well, and that understanding did not lighten the pain by a single gram. There are loops that life forces upon a person that make you wonder whether the universe is testing or punishing. And perhaps the most honest answer is that no one knows, not even the one bearing it. After Kelly's death, close friends said that for many years John was only existing, not living. He withdrew, stepped back from the public lights, focused entirely on Ella and Benjamin, shielding the 2 remaining children the way Kelly had once shielded him through every storm. He regularly posted photos and videos remembering Kelly on Mother's Day, on her birthday, on family holidays, keeping the mother's image alive in the children's memories, even though she no longer sat at the dinner table. In 2021, in an interview with Esquire magazine, Travolta said, "I have learned that crying and mourning someone is a very private thing. Grieving is a personal matter, and experiencing your own journey is what leads to healing. That was not philosophy. That was the words of a man who had buried his love at 23, buried his son at 55, buried his wife at 66. John Travolta began showing signs of baldness in the early 1980s when he was just past 30, and for nearly 3 decades afterward, he hid it with wigs and carefully designed hairstyles. But the media gave him no shelter. Paparazzi chased him with telephoto lenses, snapping moments when he was not wearing a wig in parking lots, at airports, in places where anyone deserves to be left alone, and turned his personal insecurity into entertainment for millions of tabloid readers. This was a concrete, almost cruel version of the central paradox of his entire life. The world wanted John Travolta forever to be Danny Zuko, and every fallen hair was a betrayal of the immortal image they themselves had imposed on him. Then on the first day of 2019, Travolta posted a selfie on Instagram. Completely bald, relaxed smile, no wig, no hiding, no apology. Close friend Pitbull, famous for his signature bald look, had encouraged him to try it. Kelly Preston said she loved it, had always loved the idea. Daughter Ella fully supported it. Travolta told Extra, "I feel great. The funniest reaction is the attention. I feel like Zooslander, I step out, and the new look becomes news." From 2019 onward, he has kept the bald look as his official style, turning what the media once used to mock him into his own deliberate choice. There is a quiet dignity in allowing a legend to exist outside the frozen version the world wants to keep, and Travolta chose dignity over illusion. On the career side, the second fading came slower and quieter than the first. After the 2000s, major roles gradually grew fewer, but this time there was no Quentin Tarantino waiting at the end of the tunnel with a script that would change everything. Gotti in 2018, the biographical film about mafia boss John Gotti that Travolta starred in and produced, was heavily panned by critics, 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, a ruthless number for an actor who had been nominated for 2 Oscars. Then came a string of small limited-release action films. The Fanatic in 2019, Trading Paint in 2019, Cash Out in 2024, movies that earned modest box office and left theaters faster than they arrived. The career did not collapse. It faded slowly, quietly, the way sunset light dies without anyone noticing the exact moment the sky turns dark. Yet amid that prolonged quiet, there was one notable exception, proving that talent never truly disappears. It only waits for the right script. In 2016, Travolta took the role of attorney Robert Shapiro in the FX series The People v. O.J. Simpson, American Crime Story. The part was far smaller than the ones that had brought him to the Oscars, but Travolta shone with the precision and depth only a seasoned actor can deliver. The series won an Emmy. Travolta received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Supporting Actor, not in film but in television, a smaller stage, yet enough to remind the world that he was still here, still able to take over the screen whenever he stepped into the frame. It was a late spark in the career. Enough to remind that the talent was still intact, but the world had moved on, audiences had turned toward new names, and the industry waits for no one, even if that someone was once Tony Manero or Vincent Vega. When the career quieted and the body aged, when the dance floor lights had gone out and the big screen no longer called his name as often, Travolta had to face the reality every performing artist fears, the emptiness when there is no longer a role to hide behind. No character to escape into, no camera to turn pain into art. For the first time in more than 4 decades, he was living a life without a script, and a life without a script is far harder than any role. About 4 years after Kelly's death, something began to change. In 2024, Travolta's closest friends started noticing. The old John was back. In August, he and daughter Ella flew to Paris to watch the Olympics. Not a casual trip, but a real adventure he planned. 5-star hotels, shopping, Michelin restaurants, private museum tours, then sitting side by side in the stands watching athletes compete. Father and daughter enjoying the world, as if making up for all the years' pain had frozen everything. When they returned to Florida, he hosted a large dinner with friends. For the first time in many years, the house in Ocala filled with laughter that did not carry a sense of guilt. For a long time after Kelly's death, John had only existed, not lived, performing the basic functions of a single father without truly being present in his own life. But by 2024, he was no longer submerged by Kelly's absence. He was learning to live with it, carrying it with him as a part of himself instead of letting it crush him. Not forgetting, but moving from grief into remembrance, and that is the farthest distance a man who has lost so much can travel. At age 72 in 2026, John Travolta has 3 children. 1 is gone. 2 remain. And each child carries a different emotional role in his life, forming the most complete picture of the man. Not as an actor, not as a star, but as a father. Jet is the pain that is preserved. Every year on Jet's birthday, Travolta posts old photos on Instagram. The boy's smile, family moments, memories from when Jet was small. Daughter Ella always responds with heart emojis. He does not let Jet be forgotten, does not let that name sink into the past, even though every mention of his son touches again the worst morning of his life. Jet is always present in the photos on the walls of the Ocala house, in the sometimes excessive caution of a father who has known what it is to lose a child and from then on sees everything through a lens of fear that never fully goes out. Ella Blue is the legacy being passed on. In 2026, at age 26, Ella has chosen her father's path of acting, not because of pressure from the Travolta name, but because grandmother Helen once inspired John, and John passed it to his child without needing to teach it in words. Ella plays a flight attendant in Propeller One-Way Night Coach, her father's directorial debut. The next project, Black Tides, will feature father and daughter together on screen. A survival film about a distant father trying to reconnect with his daughter during a sailing trip attacked by a killer whale. Ella stood beside her father through her brother's death, through her mother's death, through the silent years when he withdrew from the world. She has inherited not only John Travolta's profession but his endurance, the ability to keep standing when life keeps knocking him down. Benjamin is hope, but also fear. In 2026, Benjamin is 16, exactly the age Jet was when he died, a coincidence no father can overlook no matter how hard he tries. On Kevin Hart's Heart-to-Heart program, Travolta recounted a conversation with Benjamin that made him pause mid-sentence. Late one night, while the two of them were walking around the neighborhood, Ben, then only 10, suddenly said, "Because Mom is gone, I'm scared you'll be gone too." Travolta explained to his son the differences, about life expectancy, about living, but he also acknowledged the uncertainty, because he knew far better than most people on this planet that life keeps no promises. He did not tell his son that everything would be fine. He did not promise he would always be there. He told the truth, that people try to live as long as they can, that Dad would try, but no one knows what will happen. That was the moment a father refused an empty promise in order to give his child the only thing more valuable, honesty. And then, at age 72, John Travolta did something no one in the industry foresaw. He stepped out from in front of the camera, where he had stood for more than half a century, and for the first time stood behind it. In May 2026, the Cannes Film Festival announced that Travolta's directorial debut, Propeller One-Way Night Coach, would have its world premiere in the Cannes Premiere section. The film is based on the children's book of the same name that Travolta wrote and illustrated in 1997, a book written for Jet, inspired by his own childhood memories and the lifelong passion for aviation that has followed him. The film tells of Jeff, an 8-year-old boy obsessed with airplanes who boards a cross-country flight to Hollywood with his mother, amid airplane meals, charming flight attendants, strange passengers, and the first glimpse of first class. The flight becomes a magical journey that shapes the boy's future. The book was written for Jet, the child who died 17 years before the film premiered. And in the film, Ella was one of the flight attendants, the living child carrying on the family's legacy. A father's book written for his firstborn becomes a film in which the second child appears. Two children, one gone and one still living, connected by the same story. Travolta is a real pilot from age 22, with more than 9,000 logged flight hours, ratings for the Boeing 707, 737-747, Bombardier Global Express, and the first private pilot ever to fly an Airbus A380. The sky has always been the second refuge after the dance floor, the place where he is truly free, where the ground and every pain on it becomes small below, the place closest to the feeling only the disco floor once gave him when he was young. On May 15, 2026, Travolta walked the Cannes red carpet at the Debussy Theater, wearing a cream beret, glasses, bald, no longer Danny Zuko, no longer Vincent Vega, no longer Tony Manero. A 72-year-old man, comfortable in his own skin, presenting the film he wrote, directed, produced, and narrated, the film he called A Look at What Matters Most to Me in This Life. The film premiered globally on Apple TV on May 29, 2026, running 61 minutes, short, tight, personal, not trying to be a masterpiece, only trying to be true. John Travolta is not an immortal, flawless idol, nor a cautionary tale of wasted potential. He is a man who has lived at both of the most extreme poles of human experience. He once stood at the center of the world's largest stage and made the entire planet dance along with him. And he also once knelt on a cold bathroom floor in the Bahamas, breathing into the mouth of his 16-year-old son, begging for a miracle and receiving nothing. Remembering only the glories and the trophies would whitewash his story and make him less of a person. But remembering only the stumbles, the scandals, and the fading of the body would also be a profound injustice to the legacy he has built. He has done more than collect awards from the film industry. Tony Manero taught the whole world that the dance floor is the last place you can be free, no matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter how cruel life outside may be. Vincent Vega taught Hollywood that rebirth is real, that a buried career can live again if the right person believes in you at the right time. Edna Turnblad in Hairspray taught that no role is too small or too strange for someone with true talent and the courage to break his own image. But John Travolta's deepest legacy does not sit in any awards display case. It lies in the way he held Jet through that entire first night when the baby was newborn, in silence, simply listening to the tiny breaths on his chest. It lies in the way he keeps Kelly alive in the memories of Ella and Benjamin every Mother's Day, every birthday of hers, every family holiday, posting photos, posting videos, speaking of her as if she were only in the next room. It lies in the way he answered Benjamin when the 10-year-old said, "I'm scared you'll be gone too." Not with empty promises he knew life could break at any moment, but with the gentlest honesty a father can give. And it lies in the way he turned the book written for Jet into a film with Ella in it, connecting two children, one gone and one still living, through the same story, on the same reel of film, under the same sky. John Travolta loved fiercely, Loved Diana, loved Kelly, loved Jet, loved Ella, loved Benjamin, loved the sky, loved the dance floor, loved every role that ever gave him a place to hide and every person who ever gave him a reason to stay. And the price of loving that much is losing that much. But he has never stopped loving, and that, not any film, not any award, not any dance step, is his true legacy. Through every brilliant peak, every brutal loss, every public stumble, and the ruthless, irreversible passage of time, the love he has for the people around him remains the clearest thing, the most unmistakable thing, the most uniquely his. When you look back at the extraordinary journey of John Travolta, what is the first thing that comes to mind? The white suit on the disco floor, the twist with Uma Thurman at Jack Rabbit Slim's, or the young father sitting in the quiet of the night, holding his newborn for hours on his chest, listening to every breath. Share your favorite memory in the comments below and help us honor the man who paid the highest price for loving. If this story touched you, please hit subscribe and share the video so more people can hear this story that deserves to be told. Thank you for staying until the final minute. See you in the next video.